Thank you, Toby. All right. While Toby is passing that out, Levi. Where's Levi Hochstetler? Come on up. Levi, never knew, didn't know Levi. Dropped in one day and at the store, and we got to know each other and been friends ever since. So, with the time, maybe about quarter after.
Quarter after, okay. Good morning, everyone. This is an experience for me that I have not done very often. I would like to start out by asking a question, and that is, yes, thank you. Has God ever asked you to do anything that you were unwilling to do? By a show of hands. The question would be, has God ever asked you to do anything that you were unwilling to do at the time? I will get back to that, but I will start out about when I was a little boy. And I experienced this fairly, I guess you could say, unpleasant experience, perhaps traumatic, when my family and I moved from Missouri to Wisconsin. And anyhow, it was a very unpleasant experience, and through that experience, I made it mean for me that I don't need anyone. I can do this myself. I will push people away and out of my life. And I did so for many years, and without realizing or understanding that that's how I'm living my life. But I did so, and yet you will see through my share here that that was very much what I was doing. There was also a fair amount of, I guess you could say, perhaps physical abuse, emotional abuse in my life growing up, and I always felt very inadequate and perhaps unloved, unworthy. And when I was in second grade, I guess I was probably 7 years old, I don't remember exactly what took place at the time, but in my mind, I had decided that I'm going to commit suicide. And my way of doing that was going to be, I'm just not going to drink anything. Obviously, as we know, that would probably be a very hard way, very difficult way to accomplish suicide. But I was so serious about it. I was giving my things that I loved very dearly to my siblings. But I did not share with them why I was giving these things away. But fortunately, I did not succeed in that. Growing on up into my teen years, a lot of times I acted out in ways negatively to just attract some kind of attention, because it always felt, so I am number 4 of 8 children. And I would experience that a lot of times I felt unloved, unnoticed. However, I was expected to perform. I was expected to, do chores, And if I didn't do what my parents asked me to do in a timely manner, I was punished. And so through all of that, a lot of times I felt as though that I could not measure up. I felt a lot of shame, inadequacy, unworthiness, and a lot of self-hatred. But as a young man, I could never understand why I was Amish. I did not want to be Amish. I did not understand why God would make me be Amish, and I didn't want to be Amish, but yet the Amish tell you and tell all of their young that it is a sin to leave the Amish and that you're going straight to hell if you do so. And growing up, there were a few people that had left the Amish, and obviously they were very much shunned and ostracized. People didn't have anything to do with them. And I remember one day I was out in the field. I was working with the horses. I was disking, if I remember correctly. But our English neighbor was out across, and he was using his John Deere tractor, and he was doing laps around me. And I was just like, how is it okay for him to do that, but for me, if I was to do that, it would be a sin? Just never understood that and never added up for me. I always felt as though I was a square peg in a round hole. But as a young man, when I was old enough to join the young folks, I started dating this young lady, and a couple of years later I got married to her. Did not love her. I tried to love her, tried to make myself love her, but I did not love her. Rather, I felt as though in my self-loathing, a lot of times self-hatred, it would be impossible for me to love her, love myself, but love her in the same time. And my experience is that is the main reason why I had such a difficult time to be able to be open and honest, transparent with her, and to love her. And ultimately, I wanted to run away. I wanted to leave the Amish. But I knew she was very, very much of an Amish woman. She did not want to leave. So I decided that I would fake my death so nobody would come and look for me. So I did that. I faked my death. I used blood, made it look as though that I was kidnapped and somebody stabbed me. And I ran away. This was after we were married. I did not tell her. Unbeknownst to me, she woke up shortly after I left, and we lived in a house on the same property as my parents did, but in a separate house though. She, later on, talking with her, she said that she immediately, even though the house was dark, she knew that there was something on the floor next to the bed that she has to be careful to not step on it. And she looked for me, but of course I was not there. She immediately ran over to my parents' house, knocked on their bedroom window to wake my dad up, and said that I'm gone, I'm missing. And so they saw the blood out through the bedroom, out through the house, and out onto the driveway there. And they called the cops, ran to the neighbors and called the cops, but just all the trauma, the pain that I'm sure that they experienced because of my actions. The next day, so long story, I don't have time for all of it, but I ran down through the neighbor's cornfield, up the road into town, stopped at a gas station, grabbed, I think, a Mountain Dew and maybe a candy bar. Kept on going out. My plan was, on the other side of town, there was this place where no one lived, but there was a car sitting there. And my plan was to steal this car and take off. Thankfully, God had other plans. So I made my way out there, and I got to the car with the hopes that there would be keys in it and I could leave. However, there were no keys, but not only were there no keys, but there were no wheels. The car was on blocks. So I slept in the car that night to the best of my ability. And the next morning, I knew I did not want to go back home. So I called a man that has taken in other runaway Amish, basically an underground railroad, if you will, for runaway Amish. And so I called him that morning. This was a Sunday morning, by the way. I had left Saturday night. So Amish were going to church and stuff like that. So he came and picked me up, and we went back to his house. Later on that morning, they were getting ready to go to this meeting, and I was like, go to what meeting? I'm not understanding what kind of meeting they would be going to, but they had this church meeting that they were going to, and they invited me to go, but I said no, I'd rather just stay behind. So Ben, the man, stayed with me, and so we were there that afternoon, and all of a sudden a cop pulls in, and the Amish had suspected that I might have ended up going to these people's place. So a cop pulls in, and he asks if so-and-so is there, and they said, yes, he's here. So he asked to speak to me, and so I went outside, and he asked me, so you decided you want to leave the Amish? And I said, yes. And he says, well, so where'd you get the blood? And I told him. And he says, well, you're lucky you didn't hurt anybody in the process, because we would have to arrest you if that would have been the case. So he left me there. And fast forward, I started going to this church. God knew that I needed to have salvation. Let me back up a little bit. I knew I wanted to leave the Amish, but I also knew in my mind that what the Amish are telling me, or telling everybody, if you leave the Amish, you're going straight to hell. So that was a struggle that I dealt with for quite some time. But by the time that I left the Amish, I had made peace with the fact that I'm going to go to hell. But I also, in the same time, I decided I would rather go to hell than stay Amish. That's how badly I needed to get out of that environment. And so I started going to church with these folks. And within a month or two, I had given my life over to Jesus Christ. And to which I'm very grateful for, but my struggles were in a lot of ways beginning at that time just because I had left my wife. I ended up going back to the Amish shortly after, and I was Amish again for a while, but then I started witnessing to her, and we ended up fast forwarding. We ended up leaving the Amish, but you know how it is when you don't give God first in everything, and you try to do things on your own. You want to continue to keep that control. I was doing that. Long story short, our marriage ended up dissolving, and I left again. Remember how I said earlier? Unbeknownst to me, I decided I don't need anybody. So I kept pushing people away. As an adult, after I was single, I have to make this very brief because there's just not time enough to share everything here. But I lived a pretty worldly life. Did go to church at times, but I lived in a way that was very displeasing to God. I had moved to Virginia, and I'll just quickly share in a very no way that I had anything to do with it. It was divine intervention that God made this possible, and God brought my current wife into my life. Neither one of us had planned to be at that specific location when we were there. And it's such a beautiful experience that I had that night, and I think we both had that night. But shortly after we were seeing each other, you know, I had told her and shared with her that I felt the need to go to church more. And I wanted to be more committed in living for God, because I knew that that is what He is calling me to do. And I was on the worship team there at the church. And one Sunday, God spoke to me through the message. And He said, "I want you to preach." And it just so incredibly upset me, and just like, I can't understand why you would want me to preach. I was living in sin in so many different ways, and just had not fully submitted my life to Him, even though I had many years before I had given my life to Him. I was not experiencing the fullness of His love that we can experience when we really submit our life to Him and make Him first in our life. That day, I remember I came home from church. We came home from church, and I shared with Siobhan that I feel as though I'm losing my mind. I don't understand this at all. I feel as though in today's message, God wants me to go preach. He has this thing that he wants me to do, but I was very unwilling, very unwilling. As a matter of fact, not only was I unwilling, I was mad at God that he would lay such a calling on my heart that I would need to do something like this. But the next Sunday, it was the same thing again. And a couple more Sundays like that. So I ran away from God again. I got into some very addictive behaviors, and which almost cost me my marriage the second time. But through God's grace, we were able to heal from that. And as we were in the process of moving to Ohio, and something happened that brought me to my knees, literally and emotionally, in so many different ways. I was broken beyond comprehension. She found out just to what magnitude I was living my life in a very addictive, immoral way of living. I used to cry out to God, please help me. I want to stop living this life. I didn't know how to get out of it. Looking back on it, I know when she found out and I hit rock bottom, that was God's way of bringing me close to him. And through a 12-step program that I have committed myself to and also recommitted myself to God, I have been able to experience love, grace, self-honor, integrity like I really have not experienced before. But as I had said before, or asked the question if God has ever asked you anything to do that you're not willing to, there's so much more to say, but I will just say this, and that is, God doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. Thank you.